Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I have a very special guest with me, Adam Traidman, who is the CEO of BRD Wallet, SBI Ripple Asia, and SBI Mining Chip. Adam, it's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on the show.
Let's start with your background. What did you do before you were in the crypto industry, and also where are you from?
Sure. So I'm originally from Chicago. I lived all around the country when I was growing up and went to school initially in New York. Believe it or not, I actually was an electrical engineer and started my career down in Los Angeles at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab and Caltech doing computer chip design. That sounds cool, but it's just first job. And I came up to the Silicon Valley in the late 90s, sort of during the initial internet, build up, right? And I was doing chip design for companies like Texas Instruments and Cisco and AT&T, sitting there, working on chips that went into early internet infrastructure products like routers and stuff like that. If you think back, like late 90s time, this is like, pre.com, the web was just starting, all that kind of stuff, right? And, being in the Valley, I got bitten by the startup bug. So I moved from those big companies into small ones. And my career kind of transitioned, being in the Valley, I realized there's so many freaking smart engineers. As much as I was a geek and loved gadgets and engineering, in reality, there are a lot better engineers than I. So I ended up transitioning my career into marketing, and then I went into sales. But I was always in sort of that electronic space, especially electronic software, like CAD tools, like the kind of tools that Apple uses, to design iPhones and stuff like that, right? And so one day I was doing computer chip design, though, still, after the .com bubble burst, and I got a phone call. I'm sitting there, I'll never forget, I'm looking at this like 20-inch old Sony monitor, with all this complex chip crap on it, right? And I get a call, I pick up the phone, and it's my buddy, and he's like, hey, I just launched a new startup. You want to come over and join? And I'm like, oh, wow, that sounds cool. Like, what kind of chips are you working on? He's like, oh, no. We're doing an electronic software thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do for you. He's like, well, I want you to do sales. And I'm like, hey, bro, like, I'm not a sales guy. Like, engineer,
Right.
And he's like, no, I think you can do it. And I'm like, okay, well, how big's the sales team? And he's like, oh, no. We fired the last people. It's just going to be you. And by the way, like the future of the company is dependent on this. And I'm like, let me get back to you.
A lot of
and
pressure.
So I thought about it. And I thought, how many times in your life are you going to get a chance like this? So I told him, sure. So I went over, I joined that startup. It was a really cool company right in the middle of Silicon Valley. And he was like the #1 sales guy at the biggest company in the industry before. So he's going to mentor me. And he's like, Adam, I have this feeling. So we went out, started talking to electronics companies to buy our software. And Tony, guess how many pieces of software I sold or licenses in the first quarter? The big zero, right? Feeling the pressure now, right?
Right.
Next quarter, because, sales guys say, you get like a quota every quarter, right? Next quarter, 0. Okay. 6 months now have gone by. I'm getting a lot of pressure, like, Adam, the company's depending on you. I'm like, yeah, okay. Whose decision was this? The third quarter at the end of the year, it's such a crazy story how it happened, but we sold a lot of software. Let's leave it at that. And I eventually figured out my sort of, recipe for how to do that. And what I realized is that it's, in successful companies, great technology is table stakes, but what it takes business acumen, and it takes taking care of your customer. Right. I had so many customers say, I'm going to buy this software from you, not because the software is going to solve my problem completely, but because I know you're going to be there for me and take care of me and make sure I'm successful. And they were right, because that's the kind of commitment that I like to make. It's like the old school sales, right?
Yeah.
And another quarter later, we sold the company. Everything went great. It got bought by a big company called Xilinx, which does computer chips in Silicon Valley. And 3 months later, I get a phone call once again. And this guy's from the board of directors on the company that got sold before. And he's like, hey, Adam, just started a new company. I want you to come and join me. And I'm like, oh, cool. You want me to do sales? He's like, no, I want you to be the CEO. And I'm like, wow. Are you out of your freaking mind? Like, I don't know how to be a CEO. He's like, no, I have a feeling you can do it. I thought, well, how many times am I going to get a chance to do something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I did it. And 3 years went by and not much happened. And I had the, sort of like, cutting my front teeth on how to be a CEO, right? But a couple of years later after that, we sold the company. to a large electronic software company in Silicon Valley. And I became a general manager at a big software company. I got to travel internationally. And that's when I got to go to Japan for the first time, in China. And I just found that I really loved the culture and the style of business. It's much less transactional, and it's much more about circle of trust and long-term relationships, kind of like it used to be in the US, rapidly, right?
Sure.
And after several years taking care of my team at the big company, I thought I need to do startups again. So I left and I worked with some professors down at UCLA and doctors at Ronald Reagan Medical Center. And we built this really cool nutrition sensing wearable device, not a watch like an Apple Watch, because this was before all that stuff, but a necklace. And it actually could sense through here, right? Like what you were eating.
Wow.
And like your eating habits, right?
Right.
And, there was a moment when we were at the hospital down there doing clinical trials, and I saw these, obese patients who were struggling with diabetes, who had bad prognosis, and they were just literally crying by virtue of how the device could help them and how happy they were. And I thought, you know what? I need to work on stuff like this that helps the world, not just faster iPhones, as much as that's fun, right? As
Sure.
a geek, right? I thought there's a certain amount of fulfillment there that you just can't get anywhere else. So that wearable company, it didn't become everything I wanted it to be, because we ended up steering it towards more like clinical applications than consumer. It turned out to be really tough to compete with Apple and Samsung, right? And we sold that to a Japanese medical devices company. And then while that was all happening, I got a phone call from a buddy of mine who used to work for me. And we met for a drink at a bar in Silicon Valley. And he looks over and he says to me, Adam, you have to do a Bitcoin company with me. It's the most important technology in your lifetime. And I was like, really? More important than the internet, right? Or like mobile phones? Like, really? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay, so what's it used for? He tells me. I'm like, oh, really? So like, nefarious activities, this kind of stuff. I'm like, gray market stuff never goes mainstream. Okay, now that, by the way, was one of the most foolish statements I probably ever made in my life, because we all know that like VHS tapes started with nefarious activities, right?
Sure.
Here, right? Internet started with nefarious activities, but I was like, I don't see how it's going to converge from cool tech to like a big business. And so I didn't talk to him for a year. Meanwhile, he was accumulating Bitcoin and is a very wealthy man now. And I didn't. And I was raising money for that wearable company on the sort of famed Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley. At Andreessen Horowitz, I heard folks talking in the hallways about Bitcoin, because that was the time they funded like Coinbase and stuff.
Right.
And I thought, oh my God, if these folks, who are some of the smartest people in the world, think this is the real deal, there must be something to it. And my epiphany moment was when I was like, my now co-founder of BRD, the guy who I told he was crazy, he says to me, Adam, money isn't just like half of every transaction for like goods or services, right? It's what people and companies and governments use to control all aspects of society, not just business, but like actual society. And if you can change that, reduce the wealth gap, bank the unbanked, all these other things, you can actually make the world a much better place.
Sure.
Now, he happens to be a staunch libertarian, okay, so don't have to quote that far. But there are a lot of things that you can do by sort of shifting the power base, right? And so I thought, wow, all right. And at that moment, he had come out with the BRD Wallet app, which was an open source Bitcoin wallet implemented purely based on the Satoshi white paper. Like literally decentralized, every app on every phone connects directly to the blockchain, purely decentralized and non-custodial, totally private and all that. And it became a huge success. It was released in the App Store the first day that Apple reversed their decision to allow Bitcoin apps, and immediately had like 30,000 downloads.
Wow.
And so we put a business model around that. And today, Tony, we've got 4.5 million customers in 170 countries, with like $6 billion US in crypto assets that they hold in the BRD app. And it's still non-custodial. We don't touch our customers' money. They're in 100% control. If our company goes away, they can still access their money. And people always say, wow, what a great idea. You guys did something amazing. And I say, hey, thanks. Sounds great. Not true. All we did is we read the white paper.
Sure.
Everybody else created a bank. And we did it the right way. The way that Satoshi said it should be done, which is power to the people and empowering financial freedom, so that, hardworking breadwinners who make money for their families can keep that money themselves and use it to invest instead of padding the pockets of Wall Street bankers and stuff like that. And so that was the genesis of BRD and my career. And now I'm probably more of a evangelist for Bitcoin or crypto than my co-founders.
I love it. I love that story, and I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts overall. And we're going to talk about it later about where do you see the crypto market, because you saw the birth of the .com boom and how that matured, and you were in the Silicon Valley circles and building and did a lot of things there. So we're going to talk a bit later about that. On the BRD wallet, how did the relationship with Ripple come about, Ripple Spring and the funding there? And then also I want to go into the big PayID news and the Global Payments Coalition, or simple I believe it's the Open Payments Coalition, excuse me, and how all of that is coming about. And I believe BRD is also PayID enabled.
Yep. So Ripple contacted us about, has to be a year and a half, 2 years ago. They were looking to partner with a consumer wallet company that was focused on simplicity and really, a very strong UX focus that had mass global adoption, in order to have a partner that they could recommend, to customers who wanted to buy XRP, but also to companies, whether it was like a game developer who wanted to use XRP for, say, in-game currency, or remittance companies, and to recommend a wallet technology that was proven, that was easy to use, that was consumer focused, and that could be used as the product that it is, which is the BRD app, or it could be white labeled, and used like as a bank's app or something like that. So they, as I understand it, they did a kind of a research and analysis of all the big wallets in the market. That would be folks like us, and I don't know, maybe like blockchain.info and some of the other companies out there. And they decided they wanted to work with us. So they contacted us, and they ended up deciding to invest in the company because they wanted to show some skin in the game. And so they invested some money about, gosh, it's got to be 9 months or a year ago almost now, maybe, last summer timeframe. And as a result of that, we started to get more, integrated with them. So we launched XRP support in the BRD consumer app. And then we ran a bunch of promos that Ripple helped with, where you could buy XRP with no fees as well. It's the only place in the world that you could do that. And in addition to that, then we learned from Ripple several months ago that they were working on this cool new technology called PayID. Now, you gotta, if you step back a moment, you look at Ripple and its relationship with the crypto community, like the Bitcoiners and stuff. It's been a little tenuous at times, right? Because there is a whole faction that's out there that says, hey, like Ripple is not really like Bitcoin or a true crypto because it's more centralized. But actually, when we first started talking to them, my co-founders and I had the same opinion. And they kind of peeled back the kimono a little bit, right? To use a Japanese analogy. And we understood a little bit more about sort of where they're going with their tech and how it is meant to be open. And it is meant to be, non-centrally controlled. And how their strategy is to basically build a bridge to the traditional banking system and regulatory bodies, and then sort of, open up the possibilities with crypto. And we were really impressed, to be honest with you, Tony. So what we ended up doing when they contacted us a few months ago and they told us about this PayID initiative is we said, my first thought was, okay, here we go, a centralized directory of like, a way to pay people without a Bitcoin or an XRP address. And they were like, no, not quite like that. They were like, it's free. It's open source. It's given away to the world. It's not about XRP. It's for any crypto or any fiat currency. So it's not restricted to crypto. So what does that even mean? What it means is that you, Tony, or I can register for an address that looks like an email address, except the @ sign is a $sign. Okay, kind of, right? Yeah. And so now you've got that address. I can send you money to that address. Now, if I'm in the BRD app, I could send you Bitcoin or ETH or XRP or some tokens or something like that to that address. So what happens? You know what DNS is, right? Yes. Right, like the domain name resolution system, right? Yep. Works the same sort of way. So I put in your address, it goes and it queries that in a server, and it gets. If I'm trying to send you Bitcoin, it gets your Bitcoin address. If I'm trying to send you ETH, it grabs your ETH address, right? Which you put in there, right? But here's the cool thing: if I'm trying to send you dollars, it grabs like your ACH, checking account number and routing number, maybe, right? Yeah. So then I thought, wow, okay, this is cool. And then I thought, wait a minute, what if I want to send you Bitcoin, but you want to receive dollars?
Right.
right? That's where they're going with it. That's why it's super cool, because there can be intermediaries, not Ripple, intermediary companies that'll do that exchange.
Sure.
So I can go into the BRD app in the future and say, I want to send my Bitcoin to you, Tony. You want $100? You want it in dollars or euros? And then it just shows up in your bank account. And it goes through an intermediary exchange, right? With appropriate KYC and all that kind of stuff, right? Because there's got to be it's got to be 100% legal. So that's the vision for it. And it was just, announced this week. BRD was the first wallet that supported it in production, and it's actually live today in our iOS and Android apps. So you can basically send to people with PayIDs. And I think there's been a lot of attempts to do stuff like this, Tony, in the crypto industry since the early days. There were other companies who tried to do it, but they didn't have the cloud of Ripple to create an ecosystem, and they didn't give it away. They were trying to make money off it, right? And to be honest, Ripple's doing something that I think is quite altruistic in that A, they're giving it away, B, it's not tied to XRP, and C, it's not even tied just to crypto. And finally, most importantly, D, there's an infrastructure there for it to be like FATF travel rule compliant, and fully AML KYC compliant. So therefore, they've kind of hit all the bases, if you will. So I think they've got a great chance to make this something really strong and powerful.
So, I mean, it really sounds like it's pushing full interoperability. You've got your crypto, your fiat, and all of those things. And to your point of could be a middleman with the exchange. If you're sending me Bitcoin, but I want cash, that's very cool. There are some questions in the community asking, does this integrate the Interledger protocol in any way? Is it somewhat?
There you go. I was just going to mention that, man. Your viewers are smart. So if you really think about, this is all my opinion, by the way. I'm not an employee of Ripple, so make sure we know that here. So, Ripple's vision is around Interledger protocol, which is called ILP. Their vision is to create a global network for the transfer of value. XRP is just a stepping stone to get there.
Sure.
XRP does not have to be the thing that Ripple's going to, they want necessarily to be used for everything. Okay, they're all about interledger protocol. Interledger protocol means that the sender and the receiver can use whichever denomination of value that they want, whether it's fiat or Bitcoin or XRP or any other crypto, and then the receiver can receive what they want. And there can be parties in between that are registered in the Interledger Protocol network to basically do the exchange, right? And it's really cool. Think of it, it's just like the internet, Tony, where you've got all these routers all over the world, and it's like a web. But so when we're talking right now on the video, which routers are our packets going through? They're going through the one that has got the lowest latency, right? And maybe the cheapest, path that is determined by like the equivalent of ISPs and stuff like that, all done in real time. And you look really clear and moving really fast. So they do a good job of it, right? Ripple's creating the same thing for value transfer. So for example, there could be 2 or 100 parties that can do a conversion between what I want to send you, which is Bitcoin, and what you want to receive, which is dollars, and it'll find the best path to get there, to give the best rate, right? And so you don't have to worry about, sort of any of the mechanism of how it works, just like you don't worry about how the internet works when you go to a website. It just freaking works, right? Could you imagine if that was the case for money? Yeah. That's what Ripple's real vision is, right? And that's why, when my co-founders at BRD and I really learned about that and thought, this is way bigger than XRP and some centralized sort of, crypto technology. This is really about building an internet for money, which is what ILP is. We really got on board. And that is actually saying a lot, because my 2 co-founders are super Bitcoin maximalists. So for them to kind of get over that hump was a huge thing.
Wow. I love it. And to your point, I think you articulated it very well. Moving money the same way data is moving. You don't have to think about it, right? It's just, I log on, I call you up, or I send you a text. I don't have to think about these things. And it's about time payments caught up to, the modern day technology and where we're at with other data services.
I'd like to think I know what that's about too, because I built the chips and the routers, There's a crap load of complexity going on there for our video call right now, right? But we don't worry about it, and guess what? We shouldn't have to.
Sure.
And if crypto is going to get mass adoption, or any of these payment networks are going to get mass adoption, you can't have to worry about it. When I whip out a credit card and I swipe it, I don't know like the 10 intermediaries involved, right? All I know is I want to get the hell out of the grocery store really quick, right? And it better work, and it always works. That's how it's got to be.
And we've seen, obviously BRD, Ripple, and there's a bunch of other companies. I saw BitGo. So it seems there's about, I think, over 40 companies and nonprofits involved in this. And I'm assuming there's plan to bring on board more folks and have them join as well.
That's right. I think the combined, user basis is like 120 million people, actually, wow, between all the companies. Yeah, some of our friends in the industry are all part of the PayID coalition or the Open Payments Initiative, and it's a great thing that Ripple's done. I really think so. It's going to take time,
sure.
But it's got that benefit that it's something that people are used to.
Yeah.
We're used to using email addresses, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's got the best chance of any tech to do this than anything I've seen since I've been in crypto for 5 years.
Wow. Super excited about that, and certainly want to keep an eye on the developments there. I want to switch gears a bit to talk about your other roles. Obviously, some of it related to Ripple, being the CEO of SBI Ripple Asia and SBI Mining Chip Co. How do you handle all three of these roles? That was a question everyone was curious about. Like, wow, CEO of three different businesses here.
I have nothing but free time. That's what I always say. No, actually, the way it happened, believe it or not, had nothing to do with Ripple. Interestingly. So about a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, we were approached by SBI. So for those who don't know, SBI is probably the biggest investor in the blockchain and crypto industry by number of investments. It originally stood for SoftBank Investments. And everybody knows SoftBank in Japan, really big company, very progressive, very aggressive. And 20 years ago, the CFO of SoftBank Japan split out. That's Kitao-san, Yoshitaka Kitao, the CEO of SBI. And he used to work for Masa Son. Son is this really famous CEO of SoftBank, right? Mm-hmm. And so he split this out and created a new bank. And they were a traditional bank doing like online brokerage, life insurance, all this kind of stuff. Today, it's a $5-10 billion huge public investment bank in Japan. The CEO, Kitao-san, his sort of vision for crypto is extremely progressive, way more than sort of that traditional Japanese mindset that you would expect.
Sure.
And he very much inherited sort of the thinking of his ex-boss, the CEO of SoftBank. And as a result of that, they were launching a crypto exchange in Japan, plans to launch exchanges in a dozen other countries, and a lot of really aggressive crypto businesses. They are the biggest investor in Ripple, actually. They're also the biggest investor in many exchanges around the world. They kind of operate a little bit under the radar, but they run many multi-billion-dollar investment funds. Okay, so huge kind of stuff going on. They've, like I said, invested in more crypto companies than any other company has.
Wow.
And so they, like Ripple, like I mentioned before, they were doing an analysis of consumer-facing crypto wallets, looking for a partner. And so they contacted us, not out of their investment funds, but out of their like Office of the CEO strategic investment funds. So not like a VC, but like some technology they really want to partner with. And they said, hey, we want to take the BRD technology, we want to make it an integral part of our crypto banking flow. And so they're going to use it with their customers, but they're also going to take the tech and sell it to other banks to use for their customers. Okay?
Wow.
And so that's like B2B to C, right?
Yeah.
In addition to just a B to C for them. And we were like, wow. And they're like, we want to invest. And we're like, hey, we're not raising money. We don't, it was a good time at the end of 2017, early 2018, right? And they were like, no, we really want to show some skin in the game. That way you'll trust us. And we're like, okay, that's fine. So we ended up taking a $15 million investment from them, which made them our largest investor in BRD. And what I ended up starting to do was to just build a really close relationship with the CEO, Kitao-san. We call him Kitao-san. That means Mr. Kitao, right?
Right.
Right? And you got to understand, he's, the equivalent of the CEO of, an American bank like JP Morgan or Citibank. Okay. So like, right. When you meet him, you get like 7 or 15 minutes max with like a 6-week, scheduling time ahead of it. I mean, it's really amazing. He's a very well-respected person. He's on TV all the time. I mean, he's just it's a really pleasure and an opportunity to be able to work with somebody like him. So I ended up starting to build a relationship with him because he was trying to embrace Western management thinking. Mm-hmm. And he took a liking to me, maybe because I really sometimes wonder if I'm Japanese inside. I took a real liking to Asian culture around business, right? And so I'm very much more along the lines of that circle of trust and long-term relationships, like I was saying before. And so he invited me to some of his, like, I was in a bunch of meetings with him, like staff meetings and stuff. And at one point, I'm sitting there, Tony, and he says, in English, for my benefit, amongst all the Japanese guys, that they were going to do a Bitcoin mining chip, and they're going to compete with Bitmain and, like, GMO, which is a big Japanese company that at the time was doing Bitcoin mining. Actually, it's still doing it, and all this. And I was sitting there and I'm thinking, oh shit, I'm a chip designer, right? Before I'm thinking, and
right.
These guys are bankers and they have no idea how complex this is. And I'm like,
sure,
I know it's the Japanese thing. I should just shut up and just let them do what they want. I'm just like the, kind of white guy in the corner or something like that, right? But I couldn't, man. I just couldn't do it. I respected the guy too much. I raised my hand and I'm like, may I make a comment? It's like not a good idea. I'm like, banks don't build chips. It's really hard to build chips. It's a huge money sink. And the way you're talking about doing it is high degree of setup for failure. And I want to see that happen to you, And he's like, who the fuck are you to say, who the heck are you to say something like that, Right. And I'm like, well, I was designing chips for 20 years in Silicon Valley. And one of my companies, a consulting company, actually designed the first Bitcoin mining chip, actually. And I was like, so I'd like to think that I know. And he's like, okay, fine. What would you do? And I was like, well, since you asked. And I just rattled off whatever came into my mind. And I said, I would do this, and I would do this, and I would do this. The next day, he said, you're going to be the CEO of SBI mining chip.
Wow.
And here's a couple $100 million to go and build out this vision.
Very cool.
Like, I already have a job. And in fact, if I take another job, it works against your investment in my other company. So it's probably not a good idea. And he looked at me and he said, Adam, SBI has 236 subsidiaries, of which I'm the CEO of most of them.
Wow.
If I can handle that, I think you can handle 2.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think you could have said no at that point.
And I was like, all right. Okay. So we launched SBI Mining Chip about a year ago or so now. And we are building a large cryptocurrency mining company. And within 9 months of launching that company, we partnered with an amazing Silicon Valley-based chip company, built out chips, and have miners now that sold out. Wow. And are working on our Gen 2 and a bunch of other financial products and other things. And so, I started to get really close. I started to spend a lot more time in Japan, got BRD's office there expanded, and I got an office for the SBI company. And then he learned that Ripple invested in BRD. And, SBI and Ripple have a relationship because SBI is Ripple's largest investor. Right. And there's a multitude of business relationships there that are really important to both companies. Let's just leave it at that. And nevertheless, there's also, Tony, a lot of challenges that Western companies face working with Asian companies, especially Japanese, right? It's sort of like this iron curtain, around the business in China or in Japan. And so he looked at me as a good bridge. And he said, Adam, I'd like you to be the CEO of SBI Ripple Asia at some point. And I said, wow, thanks. Really busy. And he's like, 200. Yeah. Great. I'm like, okay, fine. So I became the CEO of SBI Ripple Asia, which is a company that is dedicated to promoting Ripple technology across Asia for use cases like remittance. So we have like thousands of immigrants from Southeast Asia, for example, who are living in Japan, who send money home every day using Ripple technology, through under the hood. They don't know that, as they shouldn't care, right? They just want to send money back to Vietnam or something like that, right? Sure. And now we've created, a great adoption for Ripple technology in those areas, and that's what Ripple calls Ripple Net. It's not really XRP related, although it's becoming XRP related. But so as the CEO of 3 companies, I spend about 75% of my time in Japan, since 2 out of the 3 are based there, and about 25-30% of my time here when it's not Corona, time. Yeah. Here, meaning Silicon Valley. And like I said, as you can imagine, I have nothing but free time. So, but Tony, to answer your original question, I'm the kind of guy who works best under pressure. I love to multitask, and I love to have a lot going on in my life. I otherwise get bored. And so for me, this is perfect.
I can totally relate, and I'm not saying that because I'm talking to you and trying to flatter you or anything like that. That I'm the same way, and I often think, what, I operate really well under pressure situation. I like to find solutions, and I don't know. Maybe I have a similar personality.
That is the environment which makes guys like you and I do our best work.
Yeah.
Well, we want to do our best work, right? We want to do our best work, right? So if we're under pressure, a lot of people, some people crack, some people need more time. Guys like you and I, we just figure out the best solution. And it's ironic because I'm actually in a moment of vulnerability here. I'm actually a procrastinator sometimes, right? Yeah. But when push comes down to shove and right at that end, I'll kill it.
Yeah.
And that's, I perform just like you do on your shows.
Yeah. I find the same way. And I think even I'm a director of SEO at a digital marketing agency, and I report to a VP, and he's recognized that. And he's like, okay, I'm going to give you the most challenging things here to pressurize one, because I operate best under that. So very cool.
You work for a good guy, Tony, because some executives would actually try to push you down because they feel threatened by you. But you work for a good guy, just like the guy who found me doing chip design and asked me to come and do sales. He didn't care if I shined higher than him because he knew what I know and what your boss knows, which is the trick in management is surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, which is counterintuitive, but don't feel threatened. Have confidence. If they shine, you shine better, And my job, my goal is to find people to replace what I do so I can keep moving up, to higher levels of responsibility. You should do the same.
Awesome. I definitely need to keep an open conversation going with you. I think to pick your brain on different things, and especially that you're, managing all these different businesses.
No problem.
So I do want to, know about what are some of the initiatives SBI Ripple Asia is working on. There's questions from the community coming about, hey, when could the payment service providers, the banks and so forth, use Ripple ODL, XRP? Any light you can shed there?
Oh, yeah. Without, kind of disclosing any confidential information on, behalf of Ripple and stuff like that. So first of all, like SBI Ripple Asia's business has been growing dramatically. We're not a company that's built to go public or become super profitable. We're just there to promote Ripple, right? So we're sort of like a sales and marketing team, right? And SBI is literally Ripple's biggest fan. Kitao-san is trying to make XRP and Ripple successful everywhere. Let me give you an example that'll seem crazy to you, but it's actually true. So there's going to be the next World's Fair. Can you imagine they still have these things? World's Fair is going to be in Osaka in 2025, something like that. I don't remember.
Wow, they still have those? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I said, right? It's going, if he gets his way, the CEO of SBI, it's going to be, if you go there and you want to buy anything from a Coca-Cola to a hamburger, it's going to take XRP. You can only pay an XRP. That's what we're working towards. Okay?
Wow.
That's just one little example, right?
Sure.
But more important to that is replacement for international wire transfers in SWIFT, right? So I'm meeting all the time with these bankers, central bankers. I met with the head of the central bank from Cambodia last year in December. And they're looking for alternatives to technologies like SWIFT because they want to get out from under the thumb of the U.S. Department of Treasury, which sort of runs the global banking network, right? I mean, SWIFT is a Belgian company by definition, but it's there's a lot of U.S. influence in a lot of things in banking, right?
Yeah.
And so technologies like that are legal, like Ripple's tech, are really attractive to a multitude of parties. It's not just about things like that. It's mainly about lower cost, better customer experience, lower risk, and just faster, right? The kind of things that people like you and I care about, right? That's what ultimately we're doing with SBI Ripple Asia, is we're enabling remittance companies and PSPs to send money, or individuals to send money back to their families and stuff like that, and just have it go faster and cheaper. Right? And the fact that it uses Ripple under the hood, they don't need to necessarily know that. Just like you don't know what happens when you swipe a credit card, in France, right? And it charges your bank in America. Who the hell cares what happens under the hood? Yeah. It better just work. It does. Same thing here with this kind of thing, right? And so Ripple Asia's business has been growing because Asia happens to be just a lot more progressive when it comes to, all sorts of payment rails and things of that sort. So the use cases that make the most sense right now are remittances. So like I said, folks sending money back home to their families. And then in addition to that, what's really exciting is the ODL technology. So maybe there's a bunch of Ripple fans who would like to hear more about that. I can't speak officially on behalf of Ripple. I don't work for Ripple. But what I can say is that there are customers of SBI Ripple Asia that are starting to leverage ODL technology from Ripple. And what that basically means is that the remittance companies, the payment providers, they don't need to hold balances in, like, for example, if you are a remittance company in Japan and you're enabling Vietnamese immigrants to send money home to Vietnam, typically what you need to do, Tony, is the remittance company needs to hold a balance in a Vietnamese bank in Vietnamese dong.
Sure.
Okay? That's the currency. And a balance in yen in Japan. And then if you're the immigrant, you want to send money back, they debit, the ledger here, and they increase the ledger in Vietnam a little bit, right? And then that money becomes available to their family member in Vietnam, right? But what's the issue there? The issue is I, as the Japanese remittance company, had to send a bunch of money to Vietnam. If the currency starts to fluctuate, I could get screwed, right? It's like totally, fluctuates all the time, right? And then in addition to that, I have to pay these, wire transfer fees and whatnot as well, which are not cheap using the SWIFT network. So, you think, what's an alternative to that? Well, RippleNet offers an alternative to that, but it still requires me to have dong in Vietnam and yen in Japan. And RippleNet is just an alternative to SWIFT to kind of move the ledgers up and down, okay? ODL changes everything.
Right.
ODL means that basically you can convert your yen in real time to XRP in Japan, literally send it over to Vietnam, right, over the public XRP blockchain, right? Then convert it in real time to dong, so you're not subject to these currency fluctuations, right? And then that dong can be made available to my family member in Vietnam, right? So it gets rid of the currency fluctuation. More importantly, it gets rid of the pre-funding requirement. So the Japanese remittance company doesn't have to send millions of bucks over to Vietnam that is subject to all this fluctuation. This is the equivalent. So SWIFT doesn't actually move money. Most people don't realize this. SWIFT is a messaging layer. It's a protocol. It's like an email almost that basically says, hey, you can reduce this ledger and increase this one by the amount that was sent. And it's an international standard to change ledgers in banks. Okay, it doesn't move money. ODL is the equivalent of taking cash, putting it in a FedEx pouch, sending it in FedEx, and having it arrive somewhere. It's actually moving value, right? In real time. And that sounds laborious, but it's actually super beneficial because you don't have the currency fluctuation issue, and because it isn't FedEx, it's real time over the internet and the XRP blockchain. And it gives utility to XRP, right? Which, impacts the viability of XRP and the price of XRP potentially, right? Sometimes up, sometimes down, right? But the point is that it's a solution that changes the fundamental layers of the banking system and how money is moved. And that technology is super exciting. And so that is just rolling out now. It's in, for SBI Ripple Asia, we have limited sort of trial and pilot projects going on right now with various companies in our territories, and they're going great. And I expect that probably, later this year and into next year, things are going to move into, sort of wider spread production. And I expect, companies to be able to, remittance companies that were restricted in growth because they have pre-funding requirements, they got to move a lot of capital, they're going to have a lot more flexibility. And I think things are going to be great. So we're really positive, Granted, just as a disclosure, SBI is Ripple's largest shareholder. So we have a lot of vested interest in Ripple doing well, but we're very positive on the technology. Otherwise, we wouldn't be promoting it, and we wouldn't be their biggest shareholder.
Absolutely. And I think you summarized it really well. And I know Mr. Yoshitaka Kitao, he's very bullish. He's always tweeting, and I know he talks about it in the quarterly business reviews and things like that. So folks are very curious about what's going on there. So thank you for taking us behind the curtain a bit. What's the reception? I'm curious that these payment transmitters and banks have. Sometimes some of these folks may be stuck in their ways because they've been using SWIFT for 30 plus years or whatever it may be, but now this new disruptive technology is here. Maybe you, if you can, share some, what's their reaction when they hear about this? Are they like, whatever? Or they're like, that's interesting, and maybe we'll like to, do a trial or a pilot?
Good question. There's different groups, okay? There's sort of the central bankers in countries in Southeast Asia or other geographies who have a natural dislike of the United States Department of Treasury for various reasons, they love to embrace stuff like this, as long as they can control it and doesn't get out of hand, right? That's a small minority, but that's a real thing, okay? And, there's a lot of countries that are like that. And then there are sort of the mainstream where it's, okay, and this is sort of, where the technology has to shine, and this is required. Mainstream sort of international remittance or wire transfer market is, can you save me time, save me money, right? Or reduce my risk, right? And you can do one or more of those things, right? Especially at the save me money, lower cost, right? Then, they're interested in evaluating the technology. Absolutely. And for example, in Japan, sending money is very expensive. In the US, it's not as expensive, right? Sure. So that's why you don't see Ripple replacing like ACH in the US right now, right? The technology is much more suited for cross-border payments where the costs are a lot higher, right? And that's where it's being very successful. Ripple Tech is great in Asia, very successful also in South America. Brazil is a really big market for Ripple as well. So, the reception varies by who you talk to. I think it's sort of logical. The big incumbents who have a lot of inertia and a lot to protect,
sure,
like biggest banks in the world, and those that are tied to the governments are a lot more resistant to stuff like this. And so, like any technology company, I think Ripple and SBI Ripple Asia, we look at where does our technology provide the best ROI, and those are the customers that we go after. And we're finding, great success with that, right? And creating alternatives. So, then again, you look at like the digital RMB or digital yuan, right, in China, or maybe a digital dollar, and you wonder how those things are going to work as well. So there's a lot of competing things going on. But I think the most exciting thing about Ripple is what we talked about before with ILP, the ability to create that TCP/IP, if you will, right, like the base layer of the internet for money. And no government has said they want to do that. Nobody. Right? That requires technology. Right. And Ripple is squarely in a position to do an amazing job of that, sort of independent of the, denomination or the currency that's on top of it. And so that's where I think things will go in the long term. In the near term, though, I think that, people ask me sometimes, they're like, hey, what's the real benefit of crypto? What's the real use case? Sure. And if you look at Bitcoin or Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, whatnot, I would love to say, man, hey, in Japan, everybody uses it at Starbucks, right, to buy their coffee. Not true. Okay. Now, truth, Tony, is people do use it more in Japan to buy stuff than anywhere else, maybe, right? However, come on, if you look at the global zoom out, right, speculative value. Yeah. It's an investment. It's like buying gold, okay? That's just the reality of the situation. But for XRP and for Ripple technology, I would say, maybe it's because of my role as the CEO of SBI Ripple Asia, but the actual use cases, like for remittance, I get daily reports at 9 a.m. JST every morning on all of the transfers that are being sent using Ripple Tech, okay, from Japan, South Korea, and other places, overseas. There's a lot going on, man. That's a real use case that is way beyond just speculation. And that makes me happy. It makes me excited because that's a real thing where the technology is being used for something other than, the equivalent of buying gold or silver or stocks or equities and gambling, sort of like on investment, right? And I think for a technology to really become successful, it's going to have a use case beyond just pure speculation. By the way, gold has a use case beyond pure speculation. It's called a ring. right? It actually has that, right? Most people don't realize, but Bitcoin doesn't have that yet. We worked so hard to make it, something where you could use as a payment method. But for a variety of reasons, people love their credit cards, even me, to get miles and points and stuff like that. But with Ripple Tech, you're seeing real use cases beyond just speculation. I'm happy for that.
Yeah, I think that was what brought me in as an investor in XRP. I hold Bitcoin as well, Ethereum and so forth, but the real world application, right? Solving a real world problem in the utility. So great to hear things are progressing there in that region. And Mr. Yoshitaka Kitao, along with yourself and SBI, are pushing the adoption of XRP. So I did want to ask, on the note of Bitcoin, because, and you may not be able to speak to this, but you can let us know. I read, and you can let me know if this is correct, that SBI is investing in a Bitcoin mining farm in Texas, Whinstone, or renting a mining capacity there. Any light you can shed there?
There's probably a lot of confidentiality agreements and things of that sort. You've probably seen some news that. So what I can say is that SBI Mining Chip, one of my subsidiaries within SBI, we're working on the design, development, production of cryptocurrency mining chips and systems, right? And in addition to that, we're also operating some ourselves. So we're doing some work in Texas and in other places. There's also other companies within SBI, other subsidiaries that are a mining operator, that is a mining operator called SBI Crypto. So that company, which is run by a different executive, is operating, a lot of miners. I won't say how many, but, a significant, really significant number of miners. And they have operations in various geographies around the world. That company has a significant relationship with parties in Texas. The party you mentioned, Whinstone, is one of them. There's others as well. And, there's really attractive, criteria for what we look for when it comes to running mining farms that happens to be available in Texas right now, right? Like geopolitical stability, low electricity prices, right? And low cost of land and things of that sort. So there's a lot going on in Texas, actually. Also upstate New York. And not just from SBI, but from a lot of other companies as well. SBI, though, being Japanese, the company thinks, Tony, very much like, can you imagine, think back to when you were younger, Sony. Remember Sony? So Sony has, in the early days, maybe you were pretty young, but Sony used to build the chips, the boards, the television, and they had the store in the mall. Can you imagine how much more vertically integrated could you get, right? That's a Japanese sort of vertical integration way of thinking, right? And, and SBI tends to think a little bit like that too. Why? Because it removes middlemen, removes margins for all those middlemen, and it increases profits. And so SBI looked at what they were doing, building exchanges, and they need liquidity on the exchanges. So they decided to do mining and even build miners, even to invest in power aggregation companies and literal power utilities in various places, right? So that full vertical stack from literally pulling, the natural gas or coal out of the ground, all the way to the, sort of like the processing, to the data center, to the chips, to the systems for miners, to the, sort of higher level use of those mined coins for various crypto businesses. And so you have that sort of vertical integration. It's not even Japanese, it's sort of Asian, mindset. You look like Samsung or whatever, right? They're the same kind of company. So we've got SBI's got things going on down there with Whinstone. There's some maybe announcements that you'll hear about coming up in the coming weeks and months about some really big things that are going on down there. And we as SBI are aggressively looking to build market share.
Got it. Yeah, because I saw some of the news articles come out, but no confirmation. They were kind of, a little bit of hints here and there. So definitely curious about that. But sounds like you guys are, like you mentioned, trying to be aggressive. You got the mining chip aspect of the business going and trying to capture as much market share as possible.
Yeah, our strategy, SBI's strategy, isn't just to try to do everything. Actually, Tony, what's great about Kitao-san is he recognizes what he knows and what he does best and what he doesn't. And there's a lot of arrogance in management of companies where leaders don't know what they don't know. But Kitao-san knows what he doesn't know. And so therefore, that's why he created a huge investment arm, so that he can invest in companies in that vertical integration. He doesn't have to own it all, but he's got to invest in those companies so that there's skin in the game. And what that does is it makes those parties incentivized to work with their investor, SBI, right? And it creates a natural affinity between SBI and all the parties in that vertically integrated kind of supply chain, right? So, there's investments that have been made on behalf of SBI in every aspect of Bitcoin, from mining, and even power generation, all the way up to consumer-facing things like exchanges and, wallets and things of that sort, like BRD.
Very cool. So Adam, I do want to get your perspective on two things, because as mentioned earlier, you saw the growth of the .com era and all those companies that came out of it, and you were in the Silicon Valley circles. And I want you to maybe give a contrast and compare the two of now the crypto industry and market growing. Do you see the crypto industry being bigger, blockchain being on top of the internet and more use cases? more adoption globally, or you see it on par? I want to get what you're thinking behind that, given that you've seen the .com boom.
Yeah, Tony, I used to think like, gosh, when my co-founder, Aaron, told me, hey, this is the most important thing going on in your lifetime, I was thinking, how could that be? Like the internet revolutionized and disrupted communication.
Yeah.
That's like the fundamental, sort of interaction between all humans. What could be, more important than that? Like I could send a message to anyone, anywhere in the world instantly and for free right now, right? Like how could anything be more fundamental than that, right? I do that a lot more than I spend money, for example, right? And I thought, there's just, he's connecting things that shouldn't be connected. And then, like I said, that epiphany moment when I realized that money isn't just something that we exchange, but it's a method of control. And not to be like political or ideological. I'm not about that. I'm about building businesses. But I thought, you know what? Just like when I was at that hospital in LA and I saw those people crying using that clinical trial nutrition monitoring device because it actually improved their lives, I thought, I want to do something that improves people's lives. And when he told me and opened my eyes to the fact that money is a method of control, I thought, you know what? The number one thing people complain about in this world is like the wealth gap and poverty and unbanked and just sort of this like state of affairs where the government is corrupt and controls people and all that. And I don't want to get involved in all that political stuff at all. I really don't. What I want to do is I want to figure out a way to help people. And I thought, the one thing that makes sense that is anti-political is you work hard, you earn money. I want to make it possible for you to control your money and use it to earn more money for yourself.
Sure.
That's not a political statement. No. It has nothing to do with that. It's actually how it should be, right? What happened in the world is there's all this infrastructure that was built with like banks and investment banks and financial advisors where everybody had to get a cut, right? And it whittles down your benefit to the point where sometimes it's even negative. Yeah. How the hell is that fair, right? So we don't take a political position on any of that or try to say any of that is bad, wrong, or should be killed because we're building a business, not a religion, right? But we want to provide an alternative to that kind of thing. And so I think now that I look at it with the knowledge that I have today and what I've seen happening, whether it's with Ripple Tech or with BRD or just with Bitcoin in general and crypto in general, I think there's a reason why really smart people, companies like Andreessen Horowitz and other VCs, were investing more in crypto companies than they did in internet companies in the late 90s when they invested in companies like Amazon and Yahoo. They did it for a reason, because they were even smarter than we are, and they saw this years and years ago.
Yeah.
And they realized that disrupting banking or lending, which actually, Tony, is the biggest business in the world. Okay, I mean, banking is like literally like that's how governments run, right? It's the biggest business in the world. Disrupting that is a bigger opportunity than the internet. And that's why my co-founder, Aaron, grabbed my shoulder and looked at me and said, this is the most important thing going on in your lifetime. Wow. And at the moment, I thought he was crazy. Now I realized he was absolutely right. I just realized I listened to him at that time and bought Bitcoin like he did because it was really cheap.
Right. I never thought about it, the way you just talked about it, where lending, it's like the biggest industry out there, the movement of money and credit and borrowing, right, and all of that. Because to your point,
it's the biggest business in the world. And do you know that like bank notes, like cash, right? Like bank notes, I'm looking for my wallet. Bank notes haven't changed. This is nothing more than an IOU.
Yeah.
Right? This piece of white paper with green ink on it isn't worth shit, okay? But it is an IOU from the U.S. Central Bank, which basically says it's worth $1, right? This, in its principal form, hasn't changed in hundreds of years, okay? Yeah. And in reality, things like, you say, there's credit cards, there's Venmo, there's PayPal, it's changed. No. Yeah. Those are bandages on top of an existing system. Do you know why it takes 2 to 3 days to settle an ACH transfer in the U.S.? You know why? When I send you money via in an ACH transfer, you know why? Because there's some big building where there are legions of people with dot matrix, old style printers with the little holes on the side of the paper. Maybe you don't even remember this, okay? But there's old style printers, okay, with IBM mainframes, and they print out all the transactions and they're reconciled by hand.
Wow.
Literally reconciled. Why else would it take days to send money between banks in the U.S.? Why? Right? It's literally printed out and reconciled by hand, and they're just moving ledgers in different, different banks, right? It's unbelievable that that's actually how it works. This is just old technology, right? And crypto, and all of these new forms of digital assets provide a way to basically transform all that. But there's a lot of inertia in the industry, man. There's a lot of inertia because a lot of people stand to lose a lot of power.
Sure.
And so that's why companies like Ripple or banks like SBI who try to build the bridge in between the old and the new are probably in a lot better position than companies that just try to say, hey, we're operating outside of AML KYC or we're operating outside of regulations. You're going to get shut down in that case, right? Because of laws and whatnot. So I think the bottom line, Tony, the message is the industry has matured so much in 5 years. They now know how to play the game by the rules, but they still got the same vision here and in their hearts, and they're doing the right thing, and they're going to change the world.
Amazing. Adam, I want to wrap it up here with some quick rapid fire items, and if you can answer them. What's your favorite food? What's your favorite movie? And maybe what's your favorite hobby or thing to do in pastime?
Oh, gosh. I'll go in opposite order. For hobbies, I like to read military science fiction. Really weird and specific, right? You know why? Because I'm a geek and I like sci-fi. But more importantly, military sci-fi, it's about leadership and strength, and it's about learning how to lead teams. And there's nothing more important to me than the teams in my companies. Like, the people make everything possible. So I'm a huge believer in building great teams. So that's why I like that as a hobby. The question about food, gosh, man, like, I live in Japan a lot. I would love to say I'm all focused on Japanese food, but I'm an American, bro. I like pizza, I like hamburgers, I like In-N-Out Burger, I like Shake Shack, I like everything else. I'm probably the #1 customer at Shake Shack in Tokyo, to be honest. You can probably see here. What was your other question?
Your favorite movie, but it might be related to sci-fi.
Gosh, growing up, the movie that I watched the most, if you actually, it's not my favorite, but the movie that I watched the most was, believe it or not, you even know who Val Kilmer is?
Yeah.
Real Genius.
Yeah.
You know that movie?
No, I don't think of.
Damn it, Tony, you got to watch that movie tonight.
Genius? Okay.
Real Genius is a movie about Val Kilmer as a student at Caltech who was crazy. I'm not crazy, like a crazy prodigy kind of a thing. You got to watch it. It's a good thing. Oh, I like crazy, stupid movies. When I read or when I watch movies, I want to escape.
Yeah.
My life is pretty stressful, bro, as you can imagine, right?
Sure.
A lot going on, a lot of responsibility, a lot of stress and all that. So when I watch movies or I read, I want to escape and do something. I'm not, if I'm with a woman, maybe a romantic comedy, but when it's just me, I don't want to watch something funny or stupid or something like that, we all got to be real people at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, amazing. I've learned so much today. Thank you so much for joining us. Would love to have you back on, and keep in touch. If there's new updates with BRD and SBI Ripple Asia, and we'd love to have you back on to talk about those new updates.
No problem, Tony. Contact me anytime, bro.